It was a blustery November morning, the day I found myself standing outside the imposing structure of Elmwood Court. It loomed over me like a slumbering beast, its weathered bricks seeming to carry the weight of unspoken histories and secret lives. The world around me was gray and saturated with the persistent drizzle of rain. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling the damp chill seeping into my bones, and tried to ignore the hollow echo of my footsteps as I crossed the lonely threshold into the building. The historical apartment complex was devoid of life, its former residents having inexplicably disappeared. The landlady had disclosed this in an offhand way, a casualness that failed to mask the uncertainty lurking in her voice. Each apartment was vacant, doors hanging slightly ajar, creating a scene eerily reminiscent of an abandoned ghost town. To a less desperate soul, this might have seemed alarming, an ominous sign to steer clear. But I was a struggling artist, and in the gnawing emptiness of the place, I saw potential, an empty canvas yearning to be filled. It was not just the affordable rent that drew me to Elmwood, nor the mysterious appeal of the forgotten apartments. What lured me was the promise of solitude and inspiration, a chance to escape the world's relentless din and delve deep into my art. Here, amidst the echoes of the past, I felt my creativity stir, whispering enticingly of the potential masterpieces yet to be born. As I walked through the cold, empty halls, the musty scent of age and abandonment clung to my senses. The old floorboards creaked under my weight, each groan a reminder of the countless lives that had traversed these paths. Every door I opened seemed to inhale deeply, as if awaked from a long slumber. Behind each one, a unique set of bare, haunted rooms awaited, yearning for attention and care. I wandered from one vacant space to another, the gloomy corners revealing fragments of the lives once lived here. The faded floral wallpaper peeling at the corners, the dust-cloaked chandeliers hanging forlornly from the ceiling, the age-stained window panes hinting at the world outside. Every nook had a story to tell, and it was these stories that inspired me, each desolate room igniting a spark of creativity, urging me to capture their silent narratives onto canvas. I vividly remember the first painting I did. It was a portrait of the living room in the first apartment I entered. The room was achingly empty, save for an ancient cobweb-laden chandelier that dangled precariously from the ceiling. The peeling wallpaper, faded with age, and the vacant fireplace spoke of grandeur lost to time. With each brushstroke, I tried to breathe life into the room, hoping to encapsulate its peculiar charm and latent melancholy. The shadows of Elmwood grew longer as the day faded into night. I was lost in the intricate web of forgotten lives, the vacant apartments serving as a mute audience to my frantic painting. The sense of being utterly alone was profound, yet oddly comforting. The eerie silence, punctuated only by my brush against the canvas and the occasional whisper of wind against the creaky window panes, became my symphony, my muse. My first night in Elmwood Court was filled with odd noises. The hushed whispers of the ancient building surrounded me, every groan of the old floorboards and distant rattle of loose window panes reverberating through the silence of the night. A relentless draft wafted through the cracks of the apartment doors, and I huddled deeper into my jacket, the icy chill of the building gnawing at my bones. Yet in that shadowy silence, a wave of inspiration watched over me. The peculiar allure of the deserted complex beckoned me. So I wandered, driven by an insatiable curiosity, each apartment unveiling a new chapter of a forgotten era. The first few days were an exploration of sorts, an unraveling of the forgotten pasts. Every unit was a distinct scene, echoing the individual lives that once filled the empty rooms with laughter, tears, hopes, and despair. Each seemed to bear the vestiges of its previous occupants, not through physical remnants, but in the subtle aura that clung to the spaces. Apartment 2B still held a whiff of long-ago smoked cigars and aged whiskey, a faint ode to a gentleman perhaps, who once found solace in its confines. 4A was pervaded by the lingering scent of a floral perfume, mixed with the distant strains of soft melodies, as if a lady of the past still hummed her lullabies within its walls. With my sketchbook and a handful of charcoal pencils, I tried to capture these impressions. The ornate fireplace in 2B, the charming bay window in 4A, the cracked porcelain sink in 1C. Each became a character in my narratives, their silent tales flowing onto my pages. The eerie silence of the complex was my companion, occasionally broken by the screech of a raven or the rustle of dried leaves carried by the wind. In this ghostly solitude, I found an unusual sense of tranquility. The stark loneliness of the place seemed to mirror my own existence. A struggling artist yearning for recognition, living on the fringes of society. I started to paint with a renewed vigor, each empty apartment offering a unique canvas for my creativity. I began to feel a peculiar kinship with the building. I was becoming part of its history, just as it was becoming part of mine. The once eerie echoes now felt like faint murmurs of encouragement, the ghostly solitude transforming into a comforting companion. However, as the days rolled on, a peculiar sensation started to creep over me. The initial fascination with my new abode started giving way to a sense of foreboding. The once comforting solitude began to feel heavy, pressing down on me, its weight augmented by the cloying silence. There was a certain unease in the air, a palpable tension that seemed to swell with every passing day. I began to feel watched, as if unseen eyes were following my every move, scrutinizing my every brushstroke. Every creaking floorboard, every shifting shadow seemed to hint at the presence of something, or someone. My solitary existence, the peculiar desolation of Elmwood, started reflecting in my work. The quaint charm of the apartments gradually began to give way to a darker theme. My paintings were no longer just depictions of empty rooms. They were transforming into somber interpretations of solitude and forgotten lives. I was painting not just the physical structures, but also capturing the invisible residues of past lives, the ghostly imprints left behind by Elmwood's former occupants. My relationship with Elmwood Court was becoming increasingly intertwined, my existence seemingly fused with the essence of the building. My daylight hours were devoted to the exploration of each vacant apartment, my sketches and subsequent paintings mirroring the somber reality of those deserted rooms. And when the last rays of sun abandoned Elmwood, leaving it in the embrace of the quiet night, I found solace in my solitary studio, accompanied only by my half-finished masterpieces and the ever-present hush of the building. Nights were especially eerie. The old building creaked and groaned under the strain of its years, the sounds amplified in the stillness, the occasional whistling wind howling through the narrow corridors, the sporadic pattering of tiny feet, perhaps a rat or two, and the odd drip-drop from a leaky faucet were the only signs of life. It felt as though the building, in its moonlit gloom, was breathing, whispering its forgotten tales to anyone who would still listen. I found myself drawn into its eerie orchestra, my art becoming a conduit for Elmwood's silenced narratives. One peculiar night, as I was battling sleep, I felt a strange compulsion, a relentless urge that drew me to my easel, my hands instinctively reaching out for my palette and brushes. I remember the room bathed in the pale glow of the moon, filtering through the grime-streaked window, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the frayed wallpaper. A sense of unexplainable familiarity hung in the air, a feeling that was both disconcerting yet compelling. I dipped my brush into the palette, the rich colors gleaming under the dim light, and started painting one of the units I had sketched earlier in the day, a once luxurious suite on the ground floor, with a grand oak door and ornate ceiling moldings. I worked tirelessly into the night, each stroke of my brush bringing the room to life. As the first streaks of dawn broke over the horizon, I retreated into a fitful sleep, exhaustion finally claiming me. I was roused by the midday sun, its golden rays illuminating the dust particles dancing in the stale air of my apartment. I groggily pulled myself out of bed, my body protesting the lack of proper rest, and my eyes fell on the painting from the night before. The sight that greeted me was shocking. The empty room I had painted had undergone a transformation. What was once a depiction of an abandoned, lifeless space was now a room buzzing with ghostly life. Ethereal figures, none of which I remember painting, now occupied the room. Their faces were ashen, their eyes devoid of light, each one frozen in an eerie portrayal. My breath caught in my lungs as I took in the scene before me. Icy dread crept up my back like a spider, and my skin prickled with goosebumps. I shuffled through the rest of my collection hurriedly. A panic set over me as I realized the transformations were not limited to that one painting. Each canvas now bore its own set of otherworldly figures, former residents of Elmwood Court, their despair and hopelessness mirrored in my art. My once peaceful refuge was beginning to morph into a place of mystery and fear. I felt a sense of trepidation creeping into my soul. The silence of the apartments felt heavier, their secrets more ominous. Yet I couldn't tear myself away from the enigma that Elmwood had become. The ghostly figures, their mournful gazes, their untold stories were all etched onto my canvases. The phenomenon of my transformed art set me on edge. The spiritual figures, each unique yet bound by a shared forlorn expression, seemed to gaze back at me from the canvas, their silent pleas echoing through the confines of my room. The once comforting solitude of my studio had turned oppressive, the air heavy with unspoken histories. Desperate for understanding, I found myself drawn back to the vacated apartments, hoping to uncover some semblance of an explanation. The room seemed different in the cold light of my discovery. What was once fascinating had turned ominous, the air rife with silent accusations. I ventured into apartment 2B, where the lingering scent of cigars and aged whiskey still filled the air. I could almost visualize the gentleman from my painting, his ghostly visage haunting the room, the flickering flame of the hearth casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. His presence felt so palpable, his grief so tangible, I felt as if I had been transported back in time. Each room I visited was similarly haunted. The ghostly figures from my paintings appeared to inhabit the space. The lady in 4A, her ethereal lullaby seemingly resonating through the silent apartment. The elderly man in 1C, his apparitional form hunched over the crackled porcelain sink. Their presence seemed to fill the desolate apartments, their stories echoing off the peeling wallpaper and dusty floorboards. The whispers of Elmwood Court grew louder, each visit to a vacant apartment adding another layer of mystery. Struggling to make sense of my situation, I buried myself in my art. Each brushstroke felt like an attempt to communicate with the past, an effort to comprehend the silent pleas of Elmwood's unearthly residents. My nights were consumed with painting, my days exploring the vacant apartments, seeking clues, yearning for an understanding that seemed perpetually out of reach. The silence of Elmwood Court felt increasingly oppressive, its vast emptiness resonating with my loneliness. The ghostly figures in my paintings seemed to mock my isolation, their silent gazes reminding me of my desperate predicament. Yet, amid this chaos, a strange thought started to take root in my mind. The figures, the silent whispers, the oppressive solitude, they all were not meant to scare me, but to communicate. It felt as though Elmwood Court, through its disembodied residents, was trying to convey something, a message lost in time, pleading for someone to listen. In my quest to comprehend the complex, I had become a solitary detective. Each vacant apartment a crime scene begging to be analyzed. Each ghostly figure a silent witness yearning to share their story. Every detail became a clue. The faded patches on the wallpaper, the chipped tiles in the kitchens, the subtle scents permeating the apartments. My days took on a rhythm of their own. I would explore a room, capturing its essence with my sketches and photographs, and spend the night pouring my interpretations onto canvas. The specters would materialize overnight, their ghostly forms woven into my art, their muted cries echoing in the stillness of my studio. Yet the clues remained frustratingly cryptic. Each revelation only led to more questions, each specter a mystery wrapped in an enigma. I found myself being drawn further into the spiritual world of Elmwood, its convoluted corridors revealing more of its concealed past with each passing day. That's when I discovered the library. Tucked away at the end of a barely used hallway, the old library was a goldmine of forgotten history. Dusty tomes and aged newspapers filled the tall wooden shelves, each page a piece of Elmwood's past. The musty scent of old paper filled the room, mingling with the faint aroma of ink and leather. I spent hours poring over the material, my fingers leaving trails in the layers of dust. The brittle pages whispered tales of the residents of Elmwood Court, the people who had once filled its empty apartments with life. Tragic love stories, tales of unparalleled ambition, stories of lives lived in seclusion. A kaleidoscope of human experiences were etched in these faded documents. As I dived deeper into the past, I began to find unsettling similarities between the past residents of Elmwood and the specters in my paintings. The gentleman in 2B, who I learned was a retired military officer seeking solace in the solitude after a devastating war. The lady in 4A, a widow who sang lullabies to the memory of her lost child. Each revelation sent a chill down my spine, the reality of my shadowy residence becoming more tangible. Even more disconcerting was the realization that each of these residents had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only a vacant apartment and a tale of unanswered questions. It was as if they had simply vanished, absorbed by the very walls of Elmwood Court. The line between my art and the haunting reality of Elmwood was becoming increasingly blurred. The vacant apartments were no longer just remnants of a bygone era. They were active portals to the past, harboring the ghostly residues of the disappeared residents. My paintings, I realized, were not merely capturing these echoes. They were the echoes, each canvas a haunting copy of a life abruptly ceased. I felt the weight of my discovery pressing down on me. I was the sole witness to a chilling history, the only voice for the voiceless specters of Elmwood Court. The burden of their untold stories weighed heavily on my shoulders. Despite the mounting dread and the chilling revelations, I pressed on, driven by a voracious curiosity and a newfound sense of responsibility. I was determined to uncover the truth, not just for my peace, but for theirs. As the nights grew darker and the whispers of the unearthly residents louder, I descended further into the convoluted past of Elmwood Court. My days blurred into an indistinct mesh of sketches and sightings, and I found my reality bending, reshaping itself around the enigmatic essence of Elmwood. My exploration of the library gave me clues. The lady in 4A, whose soft lullabies echoed in the night, was once a renowned opera singer. Her life, filled with tragic losses, had led her to the solitude of Elmwood, where she disappeared without a trace, leaving behind an apartment filled with haunting melodies. The gentleman in 2B, who enjoyed cigars and aged whiskey, was not only a military officer, but an acclaimed war journalist who sought refuge within Elmwood's walls from the horrors he had witnessed. He too vanished, leaving only an enigmatic trail of cigar smoke. With each revelation, the specters in my paintings seemed to grow more vivid, their expressions more intense, their gazes more pleading. They were no longer haunted anomalies, but echoes of real, breathing lives that once found sanctuary in Elmwood. And in the surreal dance of light and shadows, their stories unfolded on my canvases, as tangible as the paint itself. The serenity of my art studio was replaced by a brooding unease. The walls seemed to close in, the ceilings pressed down, and each creak of the old floorboards echoed ominously in the tense of silence. My paintings bore witness to the transformation, their once vibrant hues now muted, mirroring the sorrow and anguish of Elmwood's ghostly residents. Yet my obsession with Elmwood's enigma didn't wane. The shadowy faces in my paintings were a testament to a horrific pattern, repeating itself within Elmwood's ancient walls. Every person, every soul who had disappeared bore a common thread. They were all people seeking refuge, individuals looking to escape some form of personal torment. The question of why and how these tormented souls disappeared ate at me. The answers seemed to lie just beyond my grasp, hidden within the silent walls of the apartment, cloaked in the whispers that wound through the library's dusty shelves. The answers, I felt, were also hidden in the otherworldly figures that populated my paintings, their faces a constant reminder of the mystery that shrouded Elmwood Court. I began to notice that the longer I spent in each apartment, the more my paintings seemed to resonate with the apparition's emotions. I wasn't just painting rooms, I was painting their experiences, their fears, their despair. It was as if Elmwood and its residents were communicating with me through my art. As my investigation continued, I began to lose sense of time. Days blended into nights, weeks into months. The eerie world of Elmwood and its vanished residents consumed me. It was a haunting dance, one where the music was composed of shadowy murmurs, and the dance floor was a canvas soaked in haunting depictions. But there was no turning back now. I was entangled in Elmwood's haunting narrative. For better or for worse, I was committed to unearthing the chilling history of Elmwood Court and finding solace for its residents. One night, as I sat in the library poring over the histories of the vanished residents, Elmwood's pattern became abundantly clear. Elmwood Court was not a haven, but a trap. The complex was consuming its tormented residents, erasing their existence, turning them into otherworldly figures that now populated my paintings. It was all falling into place, each revelation adding to the horrifying image that was forming. This was an unearthly prison, one that trapped its residents in a limbo between the past and the present. With this understanding, my art took on a more desperate tone. Each haunted figure I painted was a life lost, a soul imprisoned within the walls of Elmwood. With the revelation came a new question. What did this mean for me? Had I become another resident doomed to be consumed by Elmwood? Was I destined to join the figures in my paintings? As the weight of the horrifying reality settled upon me, I realized that I was no longer just a witness to Elmwood's chilling history. I was a part of it, entangled in the narrative, my fate intertwined with those of the ghostly residents. I refused to be another victim, another face in my spiritual gallery. I was going to fight, to break free from the ghostly chains that bound me to this place. Fueled by a surge of defiance, I set out to do the unthinkable, to confront the ghostly presence of Elmwood Court, to challenge the complex that had become my prison. In the dead of night, I embarked on my final journey through Elmwood Court. My destination, apartment 7G, the only apartment I had not painted, the heart of the eerie labyrinth. As I turned the rusted key in the lock, I knew that I was stepping into the epicenter of the ghostly presence. The final battleground. The fight for my soul and those of the disembodied residents was about to begin. Apartment 7G was more than a mere space, more than just wood and brick, carpet and paint. It was a palpable presence, the soul of Elmwood Court, its heartbeat reverberating in the deafening silence. The air was thick with an energy I couldn't put a name to, a feeling both hauntingly familiar and unnervingly foreign. The room was grave in its emptiness. Dust particles floated lazily in the beam of moonlight that slanted in front of the single window. A perpetual ballet in the eerie light. But it wasn't the stark emptiness that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the anticipation, the sense of an impending confrontation. I settled in the center of the room, my sketch pad on my knees, my charcoal pencil poised in my hand. The silence seemed to tighten around me, a tangible entity pressing against my skin, seeping into my pores, echoing in my ears. In the stillness, I sketched, my hand moving of its own accord, guided by an unseen force. The lines formed and interlaced, shadows deepened, details emerged, and slowly, a picture formed on the once blank page. It wasn't an empty room I was sketching. It was a scene from the past, a scene from Elmwood's ghostly residence. They were all there. The lady from 4A, the gentleman from 2B, and countless others. Their faces rendered in meticulous detail, their expressions a mirror of their torment. As I looked at my sketch, their silent pleas seemed to rise from the paper, echoing in the hollow expanse of the room. It was a chorus of despair, a symphony of agony, and at its center was a figure I hadn't sketched, a figure that seemed to materialize out of the shadows. His face was a mask of twisted delight, the original owner of Elmwood Court. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. The man who had designed this haven for the tormented was the architect of their doom. He had lured them with the promise of refuge, only to feed on their despair, their pain his twisted delight. He was the apparitional puppeteer, the maestro of their torment. Fear kept me planted where I stood, but I confronted the ghostly figure. My voice echoed in the silent room. I spoke of his horrific deeds, his twisted delight in others' pain. I accused him of his crimes, each word a sharpened blade slicing through the tense silence. The otherworldly figure recoiled, his twisted delight replaced by a look of horror. He recoiled from the truth, from the reality of his deeds. And as I spoke, The other figures seemed to awaken from their torment, their gazes turning towards their tormentor. The room filled with a tangible energy, an electricity that made my hair stand on end. The residents of Elmwood Court were no longer victims. They were fighters, standing up to their tormentor, trying to reclaim their existence. With a final word, I banished the twisted architect from Elmwood, ostensibly liberating the complex from his ghostly reign. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread and unease that gnawed at me. The icy tendrils of fear crept up my spine, a grim premonition of the fate that awaited me. The faces of Elmwood Court's spectral residents, whose stories I'd sketched and painted, seemed to gaze at me from my sketchpad, their expressions now mirroring my own growing terror. There I sat, in the heart of Elmwood Court, in apartment 7G, engulfed by the oppressive silence. The words I'd spoken, the confrontation I had dared, had done nothing to change my fate. Instead, I realized, I had joined the gallery of tortured souls in my sketches. My courage, my defiance, my fight, it was all in vain. I had become another piece in the tragic history of Elmwood, my own portrait already painted by an unseen hand in the spectral gallery. The thought chilled me, my own resolve staring back at me with hollow eyes from the unfinished sketch in front of me. A cold resignation began to wash over me. It was in this moment I realized Elmwood Court was my final resting place. But unlike the ghostly residents who had disappeared into oblivion, their stories untold, their torment unspoken, I would leave behind my narrative. The world would know my story. With the last of my strength, I penned this letter, a testament of my journey. From my early days as an artist filled with hopes and dreams, to my eerie experiences in Elmwood Court, I bared it all. The characters I met, the secrets I unveiled, and the confrontation I dared. Everything went into the letter. I was not just another victim, another forgotten face in the haunted apartment complex. I was a storyteller, a narrator who brought light to the haunted history of Elmwood Court. My voice, my words were the only weapons against the oppressive force that held me captive, my only hope for liberation. As the dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, I sealed the letter. Elmwood Court had claimed another soul, but it hadn't silenced me. My story would live on, carried forth by my words. I was trapped in this otherworldly labyrinth, but my tale had found a way out. And so I leave this letter in apartment 7G, a symbol of my unending journey. May it serve as a testament to my story, my fight, and my eventual fate. To whoever finds this, carry my words beyond these haunted walls. Let the world know of Elmwood Court's apparitional residents and their lost artist. And with these final words, I resign myself to my fate, my spirit joining the eerie chorus of Elmwood Court. May my story serve as a warning to the living, and a tribute to the ghostly residents of the complex, my companions in this unending torment.